Imagine the dawn on the edge of an empire. The fog hangs low, the ground trembles with the thundering of hooves, and suddenly riders appear whose faces are not faces, they are bronze. They do not blink, they do not smile, they do not tremble. The enemy searches for human eyes, and finds a polished mask that reflects back their own fear. Rome understood something that many armies took centuries to discover: war is also fought in the mind. That's why it created helmets capable of turning a soldier into a symbol. They were not just metal and rivets, they were messages. To rivals, this is organized power. To allies, you belong to something greater than yourself. To the wearer, you are no longer an individual, today you embody the empire. In this journey, we will peel back the layers of that myth. We will see incredibly rare pieces found in remote places, from lost forts in the rainy landscapes of Britain to collections still holding secrets. We will explore how these masks were made, what their reliefs meant, why some seem made for parade arenas while others bear the scars of actual use. We will enter equestrian tournaments where discipline became spectacle, rituals where the military and sacred intertwined, and the technical contradictions of a helmet that intimidates, but restricts vision and breathing. It's not just archaeology, it's psychology, propaganda, identity. What does it feel like to fight hidden behind an idealized face? Who had the privilege, or the burden, of wearing it? And why, in such a practical empire, did such a rare piece survive? If you are passionate about uncovering layers of history and facing the past, though even if it's in bronze, subscribe and activate the notification bell. What you will discover about these helmets could forever change how you understand the power of Rome. Every mystery begins with a discovery. And in the case of mask helmets, one of the most striking finds occurred in northern England, in ancient Roman Britain. In 1971, a group of archaeologists at the fort of Ribchester unearthed something that seemed straight out of legend: a complete helmet, its bronze mask intact. It was not a rusty fragment nor a broken piece, it was a metallic face that seemed to look back, with empty eyes and lips sealed in eternal silence. This find, along with later discoveries in places like Nijmegen in the Netherlands and Kokries in Germany, forced historians to rethink what they thought they knew about Roman cavalry. Until that moment, the classic image of a Roman soldier was associated with the legionary: rectangular shield, open-faced helmet, strict discipline. But these masks suggested something more elaborate, almost theatrical. Soldiers who not only fought but intimidated simply with their presence. Archaeologists found that many of these helmets were decorated with extremely fine reliefs, figures of gods, galloping horses, geometric patterns that shimmered in the sun. It was impossible not to see a component of spectacle, of stagecraft, in addition to possible military use. What is most intriguing is that they were not found in large quantities. Each discovery was isolated, suggesting they were elite pieces, reserved for a select few within the cavalry. They were not mass-issued gear, they were symbols of status, power, and special rank. The first discovery did not just reveal an object, it opened a door. Because each helmet found afterward seemed to tell a different part of the same story, a story we are only beginning to decipher. When looking at these mask helmets, the first question is inevitable: did they really serve for battle? The answer is not so simple. Unlike traditional helmets, designed for clear vision, ventilation, and mobility, these metal masks fitted tightly to the face and posed a challenge. Historians have tested replicas and discovered that visibility was limited. The small eye openings provided only a narrow field of view. Imagine being in the middle of a cavalry charge, with sunlight reflecting off the metal, dust kicked up by horses, and the roar of combat, and seeing only narrow angles. Breathing was another issue. By covering the entire face, the mask made it harder to get fresh air. In a long battle, a soldier could tire more quickly. So the question arises: were they really useful for war? Everything points to the fact that they were not part of standard campaign equipment. Rather, they were used in very specific contexts: parades, rituals, military ceremonies, or perhaps display combats known as hippica gymnasia, where Roman cavalry demonstrated their skill in public spectacles that impressed both soldiers and civilians. But this does not mean they lacked impact in warfare. On the contrary, while they limited the soldier, they had a devastating psychological effect on the enemy. Imagine facing a group of riders covered in expressionless, identical metal faces, appearing more like statues than men. The mask erased the soldier's identity, turning him into a relentless, almost supernatural warrior. That is why, even if they were not the most practical pieces in real combat, they served a strategic function, to inspire fear, project power, and reinforce the idea that Rome was invincible, even symbolically. What distinguished the Roman Empire was its ability to use not just force, but also symbolism. Mask helmets were not merely protective gear, they were silent messages laden with power. The smooth, perfect metallic face erased the individuality of the soldier. He was no longer Marcus, Titus, or Lucius, he was Rome itself looking at the enemy. This depersonalization transformed the warrior into a living symbol of the empire, relentless, eternal, cold as the bronze or iron covering his face. In some cases, the masks were made of shining metals such as polished bronze or even plated with silver. Under the sun, they gleamed in an almost blinding way, giving the soldier a supernatural appearance. To the enemy's eyes, it was as if they were facing not men, but enraged gods descended to earth. Moreover, these masks could represent the aesthetic ideals of the time. Serene faces, with perfect features, evoking classical Greco-Roman beauty. Thus, the soldier not only intimidated, he also embodied the ideal of what it meant to be Roman, projecting cultural and military superiority. For the Roman fighters themselves, wearing such a mask also had an internal psychological effect. Covering one's face was adopting a role, becoming a different warrior, leaving fear behind, and assuming the role of an absolute servant of the empire. As if the metal gave them another skin, another identity. The metallic face was not, then, a simple accessory, it was a bridge between the human and the divine, between the earthly and the symbolic. And that explains why, despite their practical limitations, they were valued and used in contexts where what mattered was to display power rather than to exercise it. To better understand the function of helmets with masks, we must place them in context. And it is here where military spectacles take center stage. Not all of these helmets were intended for the battlefield. In fact, many of them were used in events known as the Hippica Gymnasia, equestrian exercises that were less simple practices and more true spectacles. Imagine the scene, an open field, dozens of Roman horsemen clad in gleaming armor, their faces covered by metallic masks with impassive expressions. Before the eyes of the crowd, these warriors transformed into mythological heroes performing impossible maneuvers upon their horses. The helmets, with their cold and perfect features, added an air of mystery and magnificence. They were not men of flesh and blood, but almost theatrical figures representing Roman might at its fullest expression. Every lance thrust, every cavalry charge, was both a training exercise and an act of propaganda. The idea was clear: to impress allies, intimidate present enemies, and reinforce in the Romans themselves the sense of belonging to the most disciplined and glorious army in the world. Some historians even believe that these helmets functioned as part of a carefully planned stage design, where aesthetics were as important as tactics. The mask, by concealing emotions, allowed the soldier to embody a character, a figure larger than life itself. In short, helmets with masks did not only have a practical role, they were part of a symbolic theater of war. And that theater was as powerful as any sword or spear wielded by a legionary. Beyond the spectacle, however, helmets with masks also speak to us of the technological capacity of the Roman Empire. Forging them was no easy task. Each mask had to be molded in metal with almost surgical precision, replicating human features, hair, or even idealized expressions. Bronze and iron were the most common materials, and in some examples, even layers of silver were applied to give them a dazzling shine under the sun. This level of detail demonstrates an impressive mastery of metallurgy and a craftsmanship that went beyond the purely warlike. It was art in the service of war. However, these masks also had obvious limitations. Breathing inside them was uncomfortable, heat accumulated quickly, and vision was reduced to narrow slits for the eyes. A soldier fighting for long hours with such a mask risked fatigue or even disorientation. For this reason, most experts agree that many of these helmets were used in ceremonies, parades, or training, rather than in the direct heat of battle. They served as a symbolic projection of strength more than as a practical tool for hand-to-hand combat. And the Romans understood something fundamental: war was not fought only with swords, but also with the mind. To show an enemy an army that seemed made up of men with immutable, almost divine faces could be as devastating as any cavalry charge. Helmets with masks are therefore a perfect example of how Rome combined technology, psychology, and art in a single object, always seeking to maintain its supremacy over the rest of the known world. Beyond practical utility, helmets with masks also carried a symbolic background steeped in religiosity and myth. In Roman thought, war was not only a physical confrontation, it was also a sacred act. Every battle had to count on the favor of the gods, and soldiers, by covering their faces with metallic masks, seemed to shed their humanity to transform into representatives of a higher force. Some masks were designed with idealized features, such as young, symmetrical, and almost perfect faces, evoking the beauty of the Olympian gods. In other cases, details of animals or fantastic figures were added, reminiscent of protective spirits or heroes from mythology. Imagine for a moment the impact on conquered peoples, facing an army where the soldiers seemed more like living statues than men of flesh and blood. This detail conveyed a clear message: Rome was not just any human adversary, but a power with the blessing of the gods. Furthermore, it is known that in some initiation rituals, helmets with masks were used as a symbol of transition. The soldier left behind his previous life and assumed a new role, that of a Roman warrior, ready to give his existence in the name of the empire and its divinities. In this sense, these masks were also a constant reminder that the life of the individual was at the service of a greater mission. They were, ultimately, a bridge between the human and the divine, between mortal flesh and the eternal glory of Rome. Not all helmets with masks were the same, nor could all soldiers have access to them. These pieces also reflected the military and social hierarchies within the empire. First of all, high-ranking officers usually possessed the most ornate versions. Their masks were finely crafted, often inlaid with silver or gilded details, showing a privileged status that commanded respect both on and off the battlefield. These helmets did not only protect, they also spoke of power. Ordinary legionaries, on the other hand, rarely wore full masks. For them, simpler helmets with partial frontal protection were far more common, designed for functionality rather than display. However, in parades or special training exercises, some could wear less elaborate masks, carrying more collective than personal symbolism. Cavalry helmets, on the other hand, were unique. Designed especially for tournaments, military games, and displays, they were usually the most spectacular. In those events, the mask became a kind of theatrical uniform, where soldiers ceased to be individuals and instead became actors in a performance of Roman power. An interesting detail is that helmets could also be adapted to the ethnic origin of auxiliary troops. Rome recruited warriors from many regions of the empire, and some masks reflected features that evoked those cultures, showing both diversity and Rome's ability to absorb and dominate different peoples. Ultimately, every helmet with a mask told a story, not only that of its owner but also of the position he held within the vast military machinery of the empire. When speaking of Roman helmets with masks, we cannot overlook the most famous examples that archaeology has returned to us. Each find reveals not just an object, but also a fragment of life and military symbolism in ancient Rome. One of the most iconic is the Ribchester helmet, found in England. This cavalry helmet, made of bronze with a full facial mask, is believed to have been used in ceremonies and parades. What is most striking is its level of detail. The decorative reliefs depict mythological scenes and warrior figures, making it more a piece of art than of war. Another outstanding find is the Crosby Garrett helmet, discovered by accident in 2010, also in England. Its bronze mask, with almost perfect features and wavy carved hair, looks like an idealized portrait. It was carefully restored and is now considered one of the most spectacular relics of Roman cavalry, although its use was probably more ceremonial than military. In the Netherlands, the Nijmegen helmet was found, which includes a removable mask. Its design allowed switching between practical use in combat and ceremonial use in parades, showing how Rome knew how to balance functionality and spectacle. There is also the Weiler helmet in Germany, notable for its simplicity compared to other examples, but whose design indicates that it was part of cavalry equipment intended for training exercises and military tournaments. Each discovery reminds us that these helmets were more than simple pieces of metal, they were the embodiment of an empire that sought to impress, terrify, and fascinate, even beyond war itself. Roman helmets with masks were not mere protective or luxury accessories. Their true power lay in the psychological impact they produced both on the enemy and on the soldier himself. Imagine the battlefield, lines of cavalry advancing, each rider with an unchanging metal face, emotionless, reflecting the sunlight. For an enemy accustomed to human faces, that army seemed like a horde of supernatural, almost divine beings. The mask dehumanized the Roman soldier and turned him into a figure of terror, a symbol of power impossible to face with courage. But the effect was not only outward. It also had a strong impact on the wearer. By completely covering the face, the helmet erased individual identity and reinforced the idea of belonging to something greater, the empire, the legion, the destiny of Rome. The soldier ceased to be a common man and became a war machine, an emissary of imperial will. The anonymity of the mask allowed one to overcome personal fear and adopt an almost theatrical role. The Roman in combat was no longer Marcus or Lucius, but the embodiment of Mars, the god of war. This psychological transformation, though intangible, could prove decisive in a confrontation. The enemies were not only fighting soldiers, they were fighting a vision of power, a symbol. And in war, the mind is often defeated before the body. Rome knew this and used this visual strategy as a weapon as powerful as spears and swords. For a long time, historians debated whether helmets with masks were actually used in combat or reserved for ceremonies and parades. At first glance, they seem impractical. Visibility was reduced, ventilation minimal, and their weight uncomfortable for long battles. A soldier in the middle of a fight needed to move quickly, see clearly, and breathe freely. A fully enclosed helmet did not seem the best option. For this reason, many experts argue that these pieces were mainly used in military tournaments and displays of power, such as the so-called Hippica Gymnasia, where Roman cavalry carried out training exercises that were, at the same time, public spectacles. In these events, helmets with masks symbolized discipline, wealth, and status, showing that Rome was strong not only in war but also in the visual culture of power. However, their use in the battlefield cannot be entirely ruled out. Some records and archaeological remains suggest that certain lighter and simpler models could indeed have been employed in real combat, especially by officers or elite warriors. In such cases, their function was more psychological than practical, to intimidate the enemy at the first clash, before the sword was even raised. In short, these helmets were much more than defensive weapons, they were a visual language, a message of supremacy, reserved for those who held a special place within the Roman army. One of the great enigmas surrounding helmets with masks is the mastery with which they were crafted. They were not simple iron pieces mass-produced for common soldiers. They were true works of art in metal, designed with a precision that surprises even today. Many were made of bronze or iron covered with a thin layer of silver, giving them an almost supernatural glow under the sun. That radiance not only dazzled but also conveyed a message: the wearer belonged to an elite. The manufacture of these helmets required the best craftsmen of the empire. They are believed to have come from specialized workshops in regions rich in metallurgy, such as Pannonia, Dacia, or even central workshops in Rome. Each piece was unique, hammered into shape, then polished, and often decorated with reliefs representing gods, heroes, or military symbols. The most impressive detail is the fit. These masks were not standardized, they were molded to adapt to the face of the soldier who would wear them. Some even seem to capture specific human features, leading scholars to think that, in certain cases, they were idealized portraits of the wearer himself. Behind every helmet with a mask lay months of work, dozens of expert hands, and a carefully guarded secret, the ability to turn metal into an immortal face. Thus, each helmet was more than a piece of protection, it was a declaration of identity, power, and art. Although many masked helmets were lost over time, some specimens have survived and are now displayed as authentic archaeological treasures. One of the most famous is the Ribchester helmet, found in England in the 18th century. It was buried next to the remains of a Roman fort and is one of the most complete pieces known. Its polished metal mask reflects both artistry and the intent to provoke awe in those who saw it. Another impressive discovery is the Nijmegen helmet, unearthed in the Netherlands. Its detailed decorative design suggests it was not just a military object, but also ceremonial, likely used in parades and spectacles that blended power with propaganda. In Germany, the Augst helmet was discovered, preserving fine details on the cheeks and forehead, showcasing the almost unsettling realism of these masks. Each archaeological find not only confirms the existence of these objects but also tells us about their diverse uses, the vast reach of the empire, and how these helmets traveled with the legions, leaving their mark in different provinces. Today, when viewed behind museum glass, they continue to transmit the same blend of fascination and fear they inspired almost 2,000 years ago, a reminder that, for Rome, war was also a spectacle. Behind the metallic gleam of these masks lay not only military strategy but also a spiritual dimension. In Roman thought, putting on a mask meant more than covering one's face, it meant transformation. The soldier ceased to be an individual and became a symbol, an embodiment of Rome's power, almost an emissary of the gods. Some historians suggest that the masks were inspired by religious rituals in which identity dissolved in order to embody a deity or protective spirit. Thus, the soldier wearing it was not seen as an ordinary man, but as a consecrated warrior. It is also believed that these masks sought to connect with the tradition of the ancestors. In Roman culture, funerary portraits held great importance, and many of these helmets resemble idealized marble faces. It was as if the army marched accompanied by the spirits of the dead, reinforcing the idea that Rome did not fight alone but was guided by its sacred heritage. In this way, what at first glance seems like a simple object of metal becomes a bridge between the human and the divine, a tool that combined faith, tradition, and political power, reminding us that in Rome, religion and war always went hand in hand. Today, centuries later, Roman masks still captivate our imagination. Their eerie appearance has inspired films, video games, and historical novels where legionaries are portrayed as relentless, almost supernatural warriors. The image of a metal face without expression continues to convey power, mystery, and fear, just as it did in antiquity. In the field of archaeology, every mask discovery makes global headlines. Museums such as those in London, Cologne, and Amsterdam proudly display these pieces, attracting millions of visitors eager to see up close what was once part of an indestructible empire. Specialists study every detail, casting techniques, traces of pigment suggesting some masks were painted, and even repair marks revealing they were not mere ornaments but objects used in training or ceremonies. Contemporary culture has also inherited this fascination. At historical reenactment conventions, groups of enthusiasts forge exact replicas of the masks to relive the parades and battles of the empire. And in modern art, sculptors and designers reinterpret their shape as symbols of strength and anonymity. Thus, the legacy of these masks goes beyond archaeology, they remain alive in collective memory, as a reminder that Rome did not only build roads and cities but also visual myths that still move us today. Roman masks are far more than pieces of metal. They are mirrors of a time when war was theater, when discipline mixed with fear, and when an empire understood that image could be as powerful as the sword. When we look at them today, we don't just see the expressionless face of a soldier, we see the reflection of a civilization that knew how to leave its mark in every detail of its culture. They remind us that power is not sustained solely by physical force but also by symbols capable of intimidating, inspiring respect, and creating legends. Rome fell, but its legacy endures. And these cold, expressionless masks continue to speak to us in a silent language, one that crosses centuries to tell us, true dominion lies in the mind. This concludes our journey. If this documentary surprised you as much as it did us while creating it, share it, subscribe, and stay tuned, because history still holds secrets waiting to be uncovered. Help us by liking and hyping this video so we can reach more people. That helps us a lot. Thank you for everything, and see you next time.